To the Point with your host, News Channel 5's Kelly Dunn.
Good morning. The Florida legislature begins its new session this week, and they'll be considering what teenagers can do while driving and who they can have in the car with them. Those are proposals from State Representative Irv Schlossberg, a Democrat from Boca Raton. He is returning to the state legislature after a 4-year absence, and he is my guest today. But before we get to those questions and State Representative Schlossberg, let's take a quick look at some of the issues he's worked on. Irv Schlossberg got into politics after his daughter Dory died in a car crash. As a state representative, he made road safety his top priority, successfully arguing for the law that now gives officers the right to stop and ticket drivers not wearing seatbelts. He also pushed for guardrails along roads near canals. After losing a fight for the state Senate in 2006, Schlossberg is a state representative again. And once again, there's a problem with the lack of guardrails. Just last month, a mother and her 2 children died when the car they were in crashed into a canal off State Road 80 in Belglade. And we say welcome to Irv Schlossberg. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure, Kelly.
Why are there not more guardrails along our roads with these very dangerous and many times deep and often murky canals?
I've been absent for 4 years. I'm just coming back, and like this crash, and unfortunately the Francois family, if there would have been a guardrail there, they would be living today. However, all I could say, the day after the crash, I was right on top of it, talking to the Department of Transportation and making sure that these guardrails are put up quickly.
How many more miles are we talking that we need? I mean, have you identified the highest risk areas? And I mean,
yeah, it's I think 14 or 20 miles, but it's like this all over the state.
Right. And why? Is it a budgetary reason?
Well, why is when they built these roads back 30, 40 years ago, they weren't thinking about road safety.
Right.
And it would have been very inexpensive to do, but they just weren't thinking about it.
Will it be a priority this
It's a priority of mine, absolutely.
Let's talk about driving and the driving measures you're proposing for younger drivers. And the first, raising the driving age to get your permit from 16 to 17. Is there a lot of support for this?
Well, when I started with the seatbelt law, there was virtually no support. And then 8 years later, it's everybody, I love it, I love it. So it's the same thing with raising the driving age. They have to be, it's a battle in the trenches. And I got to get in the trenches. There's 159 other legislators who I have to convince. And
I mean, I don't know, I would think if they're parents and they see the rates of fatalities among young teenage drivers, might be something that would sway them.
It's not that they are parents, most of them. However, a lot of the legislators have other priorities. And I bring this from the bottom of the pile up to the top of the pile. And they start thinking, you know what, you're right, Irv. And so I have probably half of them are probably saying, you're right, Irv. But like it takes more than half of them.
Well, and you're probably going to hear from, if you haven't already, from some parents who do say, you know, I rely on my teenager to help me out by doing a lot of the driving. So, I mean, are you getting some pushback from constituents?
Well, I can't really think about that. What I think about is, in New Jersey, the licensure age is 17. Next door in Connecticut, it's 16. Fatalities, 4 out of 100,000 16-year-olds die in crashes in New Jersey, whereas it's 20 out of 100,000. I mean, it's huge, the difference between New Jersey and Connecticut, where New Jersey has a 17-year-old licensure and Connecticut has 16.
There's no doubt these days more and more teenagers are driving distracted because of phones.
They are.
Texting and all of that. Are you calling for an all-out ban?
Yeah, no. I'm calling for they can still be on their phone as long as it's hands-free. However, if they're texting, and the first time they're texting, they get a regular ticket, and the second time they're texting, they get their license taken away. That's the only thing they're going to learn by, is getting their license taken away, because a lot of times, you know, you think you have good kids, and it's like with my daughter. I told my daughter so many times, don't go with strangers in a car, wear your seatbelt. All of a sudden, one day, she's dead. And so, you know, a lot of people say, well, it's the parents' responsibility. Well, I told my daughter all these times. And
of course you did, right. Well, and that's another thing you're pushing for, is limiting the number of
passenger, right, yeah. Exactly. Right. New drivers should only have one other passenger in the car besides siblings and relatives. When you start pushing a lot of kids in the car, the distractions get worse. Everybody's screaming and yelling. They're all texting. They're on their iPads. They're on their iPhones. It's just a real dangerous situation. And you know what? A lot of them don't know how to drive in the first place. They're inexperienced. They're just inexperienced.
I'm definitely with you on that. And we limit our kids to how many of their peers can be in the car with them at the same time, because as you've seen it tragically, it's right. so incredibly dangerous.
It is.
Let's talk about some issues coming up in Tallahassee when the session begins. And the group Awake the State is made up of Democrats planning to go ahead and protest the governor's cuts in educations and pensions for state workers. Are you going to be part of that?
Sure. I might even be speaking. Absolutely. I mean, the governor... he has the state headed in the wrong direction. It's just like we sit there in our committees, and I'm on the Justice Appropriations Committee, and that committee has 44% of the full-time employees of the state of Florida, yet only 7% of the budget. And they want to just blanketly close your eyes and eliminate 15 or 20% of the workforce. And they pass around the red pens to just cut. On the other hand, I don't want to raise taxes, and I don't want to eliminate any services. So there's other ways to enhance revenues.
And I have a couple of placards here. These are some of your ideas, and this would be one of them. Okay, what?
Sure,
buses with advertisements?
Yeah, buses with, as you see, the advertisement has federal standard. It's not wrapped around the bus. Massachusetts does it. They get $5,000 a bus for the exterior. I mean, this is done in other states. And we have 20,000 buses in the state of Florida. That's just $100 million just for the outside of the bus and not even the inside of the bus. And the advertising is controlled by the school board. So it's a local option. If Palm Beach County School Board did not want their $10 or $15 million, they don't have to take it. And the money goes to enhance education.
I want to hold up one more because you had other ideas, and it involved renaming roads.
Like renaming the Florida Turnpike.
I mean, really, Irv? The Disney Turnpike?
Absolutely. What's the difference? I mean... Right now, it's called the Ronald Reagan Turnpike, and I wouldn't want to take the Ronald Reagan Turnpike away, but let's face it, no one calls it the Ronald Reagan Turnpike. They call it the Florida Turnpike. So what? If you could call it the Disney Turnpike and we could get $150, $200 million a year because they have so many signs on, where I live on Palmetto, on Glades, leads to the Turnpike. So everybody would say, wow, let's take the Disney Turnpike. And I don't think there's anything offensive, and it would be up to the Department of Transportation to approve who's going to be doing this. And like on either one of these bills, the beautiful thing is it's going to bring in a lot of money without costing the taxpayers.
And it's not going to, I mean, some people might say, yeah, it's going to cheapen the state. It'll be so commercialized.
They do it anyway. Yeah. There's Sound Advice Stadium. They do this anyway. And this is done in other states. And it's working out well. So what I'm saying is when the governor sits down, instead of cut, just like he's trying to run this place like a business, well, business is run by how can you increase revenue. And I'm not saying to increase taxes. Let's not increase taxes, but let's think of ways where we can be creative, think outside of the box, generate revenue for the state.
Are you working from a handicapped position almost because you're a Democrat these days, with Democrats doing so poorly in the last election? How much chance is there that a lot of the things you're proposing, what do you think?
I think there's a good chance I'm going to get a lot done, because at the end of the day, it's all about ideas. And maybe the Republicans will steal my ideas. Who cares? I don't care. On the other hand, maybe they'll let me handle my bills and my ideas myself, which they always have. And I'm a bipartisan kind of guy. I've gotten along very well with the Republicans. Tallahassee is run like a business, and you have to realize it's run like a business. Republicans are leadership, and I'm just glad to be middle management instead of blue collar over there.
Well, if it's run like a business, then is Rick Scott doing a good job? He said that was what he campaigned on.
Well, I'm saying the legislature is run like a business.
Okay.
Rick Scott is lost. As far as I'm concerned, he doesn't understand that he thinks you can come in and you can start scratching off people, lowering pays, and you'll straighten out the problem. But like what he's got to understand is that the budget is crafted by the legislator and the legislature, which is 160 people who have their input, and he just signs the budget or vetoes it. That's all. He doesn't, like it seems like the average person who's watching this thinks that Governor Scott is doing this and Governor Scott is doing that. He's not. He's suggesting. And it's everything with Governor Scott is I. It's not I.
So communicate with your state senators and your state representatives. Let them know what you want as a constituent. And
absolutely.
It'll be an interesting session, as it always is in Tallahassee every year.
It's always pretty crazy.
Irv, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
We'll be checking back to see how many of these proposals
We'll see what happens.
That's right. Coming up next, our roundtable will take a look at Rick Scott's first big win as governor, and is this going to be a long year for Democrats? Now for our political roundtable, we have Brian Crowley, the author of the Crowley Political Report, and Andrew Abramson, a political reporter with the Palm Beach Post. And gentlemen, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
We just listened to Representative Schlossberg talk about his plans for the legislature. How much power does a Democrat like the representative really have right now in Tallahassee?
Well, in this legislative session that starts this week, he has very little power as a Democrat. But where I think Representative Schlossberg has been wise is he has picked the kinds of issues that, A, he cares very deeply about because of the death of his daughter, and also the kinds of issues that's really, in one sense, hard to object to. He's not trying to drive Republican policy. He's not trying to go up against the GOP. He's got some core safety issues that are dear to him that I think he has a reasonable chance of succeeding with.
Well, and like you said, it was small steps to get to the point of the seatbelt law. So I don't think he's expecting overnight everything's changing, especially as far as teenage drivers. But.
And he's been there, before. He knows how this works. He understands that with a veto-proof Republican leadership there, that he's not going to be able to make major changes in policies that the Republican Party feel near and dear to. So again, I think it's really wise that Representative Schlossberg has picked the kinds of issues that are, again, very close to him, but are on one level non-controversial. I mean, there's always controversy with these kinds of things, but you know what I'm saying. They're not big, hardcore, in-your-face Republican Party issues. So I think they're fairly reasonable.
Constituents can relate to anyway. So that makes
absolutely. Billboards on school buses could be interesting. And but you know what? I think some of the things he's talking about probably have in this economy with these budget cuts that these lawmakers are looking at, and with the cuts that they're looking at in schools, it's the kind of thing that maybe a couple of years ago would have sounded crazy to some people. That not so much now.
Right.
Sure.
Andrew, the Awake the State plan that's by the Democrats going to be a protest on opening day. What are you hearing about that? Is this going to be something that does have an impact?
I think it will get a lot of attention, and it's interesting because you see everything come full circle. You had the Tea Party movement for the last 2 years, and now the liberals are protesting again, just like it used to be. So,
well, and somewhat, I think, in response to what's been going on in Wisconsin and in other states around the country, I think the people here are finally realizing that, they too have to have a loud voice if they want to counter what's been going on in the Tea Party. In the last 18 months or so, it's been largely a Tea Party voice, a very successful Tea Party voice. The Tea Party has turned out to be far more significant than I think people suspected 18 months ago.
Right.
And now it's not surprising that you would find some of the unions and other groups who feel under assault that they now feel like they need to go up to Tallahassee and have a counter voice to that.
In local politics, we have a mayor's race coming up in the city of West Palm Beach. I know, Andrew, you've been covering it a lot for the Palm Beach Post. What are you hearing on the streets about this election?
I mean, it's very, very unpredictable. You have four candidates, but probably three with a realistic chance of winning this thing. And there's really no front runner. There's no one candidate that people are really rallying behind and really getting behind. So what you're going to have is unpredictability. I don't think anybody knows what to really expect on Tuesday. I think the two commissioners are probably the front runners, but there's also businesswoman Paula Ryan, who certainly has a chance. Now, you're going to see a runoff. The two will advance. You will expect the two front runners to advance to a March 22nd runoff because it's just really... it's really hard to imagine that any of them are going to get 50% So it's just, but now the issue is going to be voter turnout.
Of course, I mean, it's not expected to be.
No, and
it's never been really
high voter turnout in West Palm. And now in this election, when there's not really a candidate that people are getting behind, you're talking about 10,000 people deciding who becomes the next mayor, and then come the runoff, you're talking half that coming out. And it's an important election, it's an important position, and the mayor of West Palm, more than most cities, has a ton of power. You're talking a mayor that controls the city, and yet so few people are deciding who becomes the next mayor.
And as Andrew knows, there's been in the final days of that campaign some very ugly mailers going out, accusing Molly Douglas in particular and Jerry Muyo.
Yeah, the police union, which are backing Paula Ryan, have really been sending out some nasty mailers, and some other nasty mailers have been going out, and people are trying to figure out who's behind it. People accusing Mayor Frankel of sending out some mailers. Mayor Frankel is backing Jerry Muyo, and there's been a lot of nasty mailers about Molly Douglas. So it's getting really ugly, and I think a lot of the candidates, too, are saving their money for the runoff, hoping it's going to really get nasty there.
Governor Rick Scott won his first big battle, came with a Supreme Court ruling that said he did not have to accept the federal money for the high-speed rail. How significant of a win was this for the governor?
I think if you have a challenge from members of the legislature that are questioning your authority and you win, as he did last week, in a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court, then that's obviously significant governor's office. I do think that there's a danger that people are reading too much into it. In the one-paragraph decision, what it basically said was, we haven't got enough information to decide this. They did not endorse Governor Scott's the refusal to accept the $2.4 billion from the federal government for the high-speed rail. What they said is that there is nothing in our record, and there's nothing that's been presented to us by the two senators who have filed this lawsuit that warrants an emergency injunction and for us to do anything right now. I think the overall issue, though, was not addressed in that ruling.
All right, well, coming up next, on To the Point, an unusual political pairing in South Florida after this. And you're taking a look at the president arriving in Miami on Friday, greeted today by Governor Rick Scott. Certainly a big weekend in South Florida, a presidential visit, other possible presidential candidates, and President Obama here to help Senator Bill Nelson. But he started by talking education reform with former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. And what do you make of President Obama and Jeb Bush sharing the same stage?
Well, I think that it's, I think it's one of those, let's put a nice touch on it for a change. I think it's one of those nice moments where you have a serious Republican leader and obviously the leader of the Democratic Party as well as the nation who agree that education needs reform and agree on some of the major ways that should be done, including charter schools and some other things. And, in a time when Republicans and Democrats are often at odds on so many issues, and clearly these two men don't think alike on everything.
Right.
But the fact last week that they were able to join hands, and at least in the notion that something needs to be done to improve education, I think was a very hopeful and positive sign.
Well, also in Palm Beach County, Mitt Romney, Haley Barbour, Tim Pawlenty, Michelle Bachmann for a closed-door meeting about with the Club for Growth. So what are we to read into this?
Well, the Club for Growth is a very powerful conservative organization. They were having their annual conference over at the Breakers in Palm Beach last week. The fact that these four people were invited to come speak to them indicates that their seriousness in looking at these people as potential presidential candidates. Within that group, Mitt Romney appears to be the front runner at this point. Michelle Bachmann remains a bit of a mystery, although she seems to be indicating more and more that she may run. Haley Barbour and Tim Pawlenty both seem like they're in. And, it also indicates, again, how important Florida is going to be in the 2012 election.
Don't you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, it'll be really interesting because they're already talking about Florida possibly moving up in the primaries. And even if not, Florida is going to have an instrumental place in deciding who the Republican nominee is. And what's going to be really interesting to see is if the Republicans go out on a limb and pick somebody like a Michelle Bachmann. Because if you look back, with the exception of George W. Bush, who was the front runner going into 2000, and he was a son of a former president, the Republicans have no history of picking somebody kind of a wild card candidate. I mean, you have to go back, the last nominee besides Bush that hadn't run before in a primary or run on a ticket, you have to go back to Barry Goldwater in '64.
Wow, really?
And before that, if you want to pick a real wild card, maybe like a Donald Trump, somebody that was a complete dark horse on the Republican side, you have to go back to Wendell Wilkie, in 1940 against FDR. So the Republicans just have no history of picking a surprise candidate, and it'll be interesting to see if maybe this is the year where they break the mold.
Well, and another thing that interesting started to develop by the end of last week was that there was starting to be some consternation among leaders of the party that none of these candidates have stepped forward and said they're running for president. And Newt Gingrich kind of led everybody to believe he was going to announce last Thursday. He had been in Florida a few days earlier, and he had everybody set up for this big announcement on Thursday and then kind of backed away from it. So they're, so for the party people are starting to go, where's our candidate?
Well, we have a little bit of time.
but nobody's actually putting their foot in the water. Not a lot of leadership if you can't even make up your mind you're running.
We'll be back with more in just a minute. And before we go, a closing comment, Mr. Crowley.
Well, one of the funny items we had on Crowley Political Report last week was speculating on whether or not Jeb Bush would hug Barack Obama. As we know, governors hugging Barack Obama could have earthquake ramifications in Florida, as Charlie Crist. As best we know, last week, Jeb Bush resisted the urge to hug the President of the United States.
Well, a lot of other people have resisted it too, and like you said, I mean, just talk to Charlie Crist. It's not always the best
Although
picture.
One GOP strategist, Alberto Martinez, said that Jeb Bush is so popular he could even kiss Barack Obama and Jeb Bush would be fine, and that's probably true.
Thank you for spending time with us on To the Point this Sunday. Have a nice weekend.